It's time to make a return to Switch emulation, but this time around I thought it would be fun to give the UNISOC T618 handhelds one last hurrah and check out what Yuzu can do for these low-powered devices. The last time I examined Switch emulation for these handhelds, Yuzu for Android was not available yet, and it has seen a lot of progress and development since its release earlier in the year. For this video, I wanted to see if we can open the doors to some new games and add to the list of fun games that would now be playable on devices like the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, Flip, Anbernic RG505, Powkiddy X28, and other T618 devices. So please join me, Rob the Retro Tech Dad, as we explore what Yuzu for Android brings to the table for the T618 handhelds. As always, let's start things out and go over Yuzu for Android with a brief overview of the setup and settings used here. Every game here was tested using the latest version of Yuzu for Android from the GitHub page. At the time of preparing this video, the latest version was Android 161. I will have a link to the Yuzu for Android GitHub page in my description. After downloading the APK, go ahead and install it and then we can run through some of the settings here quickly, but for the most part, we will not be changing too much here given the T618 devices we are working with. Once installed, you should see the initial welcome screen to get started. The next screen will ask you to select your prod keys, which you will need to obtain on your own from a Switch device. I will have a link to the Yuzu instructions page to extract your own. Once you've added your prod keys file, you will then be asked to select the directory where you keep your Switch games. I like to keep all of mine in a dedicated folder to keep things nice and organized. With that, you're all done, and then you'll be taken to the main screen which will populate the games that you have added. So let's check out the settings section by clicking on the gear icon on the left side. There's a few things we can take a look at here. You will notice that the GPU driver manager is grayed out, and because we are using a T618 device, we do not have support for any custom drivers. Let's head into the advanced settings area and take a look around here. The first thing at the top is the system section, which will have the ability to switch from docked to undocked mode. The emulator by default has docked mode disabled, and for this video we will be leaving this setting alone. Occasionally some games will only launch by having this enabled, but no game on this list requires it. The next noteworthy area to look at will be the graphics section. For the purpose of this video, we will be leaving everything at default except for the resolution setting. I will let you know throughout the video if a game needs to be set to a lower resolution scale, such as 0.5x or 0.75x, but I want to show where that change needs to be made in case a game does require it. Now the last important section is the debug area. The key area to focus on is the CPU backend, which now has the native code execution, and it's a very exciting development for Yuzu on Android. By default, the emulator should be set to use this backend, but just in case, double check that it is indeed set to NCE. There will only be one game on this list that requires a change from this backend, which is Alwa's Awakening. So let's back out of here and now check out the Manage Yuzu Data portion. Here you can import and export your user data for Yuzu. You can also install game updates and DLC here, your prod keys, amiibo keys, and firmware. I definitely recommend installing the Switch firmware since it increases compatibility and some games will actually not boot without it. For this video, I am using the 16.1.0 Switch firmware. Now let's go back to the game page, and a new feature that has been recently added to the GitHub version of Yuzu for Android is the ability to make per game changes, which is really nice as we do have some games in this video that will have some slight changes in resolution settings. By holding down on the game icon, you will get a new screen with various options. You can toggle on and off updates and download content for the game, import and export save data, and make changes to the settings which is specific to the game. Now tying into the ability to export your save data, I will say that the GitHub version doesn't automatically update, and so in order to get new versions, you will need to go back to the GitHub page and download the latest version. However, you will need to uninstall the prior version, and you will want to make backups of save data and user data since it will not be saved otherwise. One last thing that I always like to mention is that with the settings and version of Yuzu for Android that I'm using, the games should run as you see here in this video. But as always, I like to stress that you should keep expectations to a minimum as we are dealing with a fairly underpowered chipset. And so being able to run Switch games of any kind on these T618 powered handhelds is something that's fun to explore, and it's just neat to be able to add an additional selection of games to play with these handhelds. Yuzu for Android is also in active development, and expect things like crashes and other issues to be a pretty common occurrence. So without further ado, let's get into the games. Up first is an absolutely awesome update to one of my personal favorite games, and really one of the earlier indie type games going way back to the Newgrounds days, originally being developed as an Adobe Flash game. Alien Hominid HD was actually just released alongside the sequel Alien Hominid Invasion, but this HD remaster is the one being featured as it does work quite well here. For this game, I do have the resolution set to 0.75x in order to achieve the 60 frames per second target, and through a decent amount of playtesting, I have found the game to be pretty stable with no crashes. Next up, we have another fantastic indie game that I first experienced on the Evercade. Alwa's Awakening is a Metroidvania-style game developed by Elden Pixels. The game was designed to truly feel like it came from the 8-bit era, including all of the limitations that came with it. Alwa's Awakening is a very nice addition to the Switch playable library on the T618, and is quite stable and playable with Yuzu for Android. This is the only game I needed to switch the CPU backend from NCE to the slower JIT, otherwise you will get constant flickering of the image, an issue that is present in a lot of games I had tested, but they're not being featured here. Baba Is You is next on our list, and this is such a gem of a game that comes from a single developer out of Finland. If you've never tried Baba Is You, you are in for a real treat, since this puzzle game is based on a very interesting premise around rules that you can manipulate in each level. Don't let the simple graphics fool you, as this game is sure to capture your attention right from the beginning. Baba Is You did not require any changes and runs great at the default native resolution. Binding of Isaac Afterbirth Plus is an excellent indie game that has been around for some time, and this Switch version combines all of the expansion and download content into one package, making it one of the definitive ways to enjoy this game. The Binding of Isaac is a roguelike video game in which you traverse procedurally generated dungeons, very much inspired by The Legend of Zelda. This game is highly addictive, with unlimited replay value, and it's a blast going through collecting different items and powers for all sorts of interesting combinations. Similar to Baba Is You, I did not need to make any specific tweaks for this one, and it does run at the default 1x resolution. This is the only Nintendo published game on this list. Box Boy plus Box Girl comes to us from HAL Laboratory, best known for the Kirby series, and this entry is actually the fourth game in the Box Boy series, which now features a 2-player mode. If you haven't tried out any of the Box Boy games, I definitely recommend giving the entire series a try, as they are an awesome set of puzzle games with very simplistic art but captivating and addictive gameplay. For this game, I recommend dropping the resolution scaling down to 0.5x, which seems to keep the game locked at 60 frames per second, and given the smaller screens of the T618 handhelds, it actually looks really good. Carrion is next on our list, and this was developed by Phobia Game Studio out of Poland and published by Devolver Digital. Carrion is such a fun game with an interesting premise that has you playing as a tentacled monster in what is described as a reverse horror game. Now you, the player, get to be the one that stalks and kills as this creepy creature known simply as the monster. Carrion also has some fantastic 2D art, and for this one I did need to drop the resolution scaling down to 0.75x to maintain higher frame rates, but otherwise this is another great game that is working quite well here on the T618. Next up is one I'd consider a bit more high profile. Code of Princess EX, which is published by the Great Atlas, is an enhanced version of the original 3DS game. Code of Princess EX is a console exclusive to Switch, with a PC version on Steam available as well. This is a great action hack-and-slash RPG, very much in the same style as one of my favorite Sega Saturn games, Guardian Heroes. Now there's a reason for that, as the director and lead programmer for Guardian Heroes worked on Code of Princess as well. This is a great enhanced port of an already great game that is working quite well with Yuzu for Android, and for this one I did not need to make any adjustments to the default native resolution. Dorfromantik is a game that I'm pretty excited to be able to feature here. I first started playing this game earlier in the year on my Switch, and immediately I was drawn to the gameplay. This is one of those games that is just relaxing to play, but at the same time is quite captivating. I guess this can be described as a city building puzzle game, and basically you place down hexagonal tiles to create the perfect landscape, and of course, like any puzzle game, has certain limitations or requirements in order to get the most points and progress. It's really a very unique game that is best played to really understand. For this game, I did need to turn it down to 0.75x resolution as it is pretty demanding on this T618 chipset, and even then it isn't full speed, but given the pace it's definitely acceptable. You can try going down to 0.5x resolution scaling to see if performance improves further. Hyper Light Drifter is an entry that I am so excited to be able to include in this list of playable games. This is probably one of my favorite games on the entire list and just in general. Hyper Light Drifter is a game I have completed a few times on different platforms, and every time I load this one up, I can't help but get completely immersed by this world. To me, Hyper Light Drifter is one of the finest indie games out there, and it comes highly recommended by me, and better yet, it works really well on Yuzu for Android with the T618. I do recommend setting this to 0.75x resolution just to keep the frame rate close to or at that 60 frames per second target. I will say that during my time playing the game, I did experience a crash here and there, but this is still very playable regardless. I am always excited to be able to feature a way forward game, which usually automatically comes recommended by me. The Mummy Demastered is no exception to that, and this is one that is definitely overlooked when talking about a lot of WayForward's other games. The Mummy Demastered is a Metroidvania style game that takes place during the events of the 2017 film. As with other WayForward games, we have great art on hand here and a very solid Metroidvania style game. For this one, I recommend going with a 0.5x resolution scaling, which helps keep the frame rate at 60 frames per second. Occasionally, I did experience brief flickering on screen, but it doesn't really seem to impact gameplay all that much. And of course, it seems appropriate to follow up with another WayForward game, and probably the series the studio is best known for. Shantae and the 7 Sirens is the 5th entry in the long-running Shantae series. This game was originally released as an Apple Arcade exclusive, and so for Android users that means this game will most likely never see a native release on that platform. Thankfully, this was ported to Switch, and it just so happens that this one works quite well with Yuzu for Android. Again, for this game, I do recommend dropping the resolution scaling down to 0.75x to maintain stability, as well as keeping the frame rate up. I absolutely love Yacht Club Games' Shovel Knight franchise, and enjoy all of its various forms, including Pocket Dungeon, which is a dungeon crawler puzzle game. Like many other games that I've featured here today, Pocket Dungeon is addictive, with great gameplay, art, and music. I think it's very obvious that games don't need cutting-edge graphics to be absolutely fun to play. I do want to mention that there is a native Android port of this game available, however, it is exclusive to Netflix subscribers on the Play Store. For this game, I am set to use the default 1x resolution, and the game runs great and is very stable throughout my playtesting. And easily the most known franchise on this list, Ultra Street Fighter 2 The Final Challengers is actually a Switch exclusive entry in the franchise. This is an updated version of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo with an awesome updated high definition art style which was done by Udon Entertainment. Not only that, but this version also brings to the table some new features and modes. I did try this one at native resolution, but we really do need to drop it down to 0.75x resolution to keep the frame rate at 60, which is definitely something you'll want to do for a fighting game. I think this is an awesome one to add to the list, especially for Street Fighter fans. Valfaris is our next game on the list, and a fantastic indie game that comes to us from the same team that developed Slain Back from Hell, which I actually featured as a playable game on the T618 using the Skyline emulator. Valfaris, much like Slain, is a 2D action platforming game with very awesome 2D visuals and a killer soundtrack. Now, Valfaris has a lot of stuff happening on screen and definitely benefits from dropping the resolution scaling down to 0.75x to keep the gameplay nice and smooth. Otherwise, this is another very stable and playable game for the T618. Finally, let's wrap up our list with a personal favorite of mine. What the Golf is one that I first played on iOS since this was an Apple Arcade exclusive. Unfortunately for Android users, that means this game will probably never see a release natively on the platform. Thankfully, a Switch port was released later on, and I have to say I was pleasantly surprised during my playtesting to find that this one was working quite well. What the Golf is just a silly good time and actually a great fit for handhelds because of its quick pick up and play style with short levels but plenty of content. I do recommend dropping the resolution down to 0.5x native resolution to keep things nice and smooth, but other than that, this one was surprisingly very stable with Yuzu for Android. And so with that, we've reached the end of our showcase and now have an additional 15 games to enjoy on our T618 handhelds. I have to say that I am pleasantly surprised by the performance of Yuzu for Android. I think that the games featured here today are an absolutely awesome set of games that can now be enjoyed on the T618 handhelds and really demonstrates just how far development on Yuzu for Android has come since first releasing in the early part of this year. This also serves as one last hurrah for something like the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, since we are right around the corner from the Retroid Pocket 4 and 4 Pro, which will definitely open the doors to more Switch games. But until then, as always, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.